Welcome back to the Filibuster, the podcast of the Union University Political Science Department. This is part 2 of a conversation that we've been having about the Declaration of Independence for the anniversary of that great document. So if you're confused or jumping in right in the middle, you probably missed the previous episode, but we are going to continue our conversation now. I am Seth Brake, and I'm joined by Sean Evans and David Thomas. So thank you guys so much. Let's continue this conversation. So we were just in the middle of talking about the Declaration, that historic moment when it came together. We were talking about the context around that, but let's take a step back. I mean, this all happened in the middle of a war, and you were kind of leading us through some of the steps leading up to this. But, you teach about this conflict. This is something that comes up in, actually, both of your classes. What are some things, so we'll start with you, David. What's one thing that you think that people or maybe students don't tend to know that they should coming into your classroom about the American Revolution?
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff they don't know.
Well, but what's important?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Confusing. One of the things that is really striking, I think, in the American mind about the Revolution is every battle is imagined to be the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And the mythology is the independent lone farmer with his rifle behind the stone wall, taking pot shots at the British, who are too unskilled militarily to respond effectively. And it's just not, that's just not how the war moved forward. Even that battle was really very, very well organized. The general in charge, William Heath, organized all the militia very effectively. It was a very well fought, very carefully fought battle. But as the war moves forward, by the time we get to Valley Forge, which is the winter of 77-78, Washington and his generals are working very hard to train the army to be a good old-fashioned European continental army. And so he knows how to turn his troops. He knows the orders. He knows the hierarchies. He knows everything about how to make an army work in European terms. And so what we get eventually is two very European armies fighting one another in very European fashions. And it's not the lone farmer behind the stone wall. It's a thoroughly 18th century military conflict. Now there are some differences. The Americans eventually figure out how to use their militia, and that's a game changer in some important battles. And the British eventually do respond, changing their military formations a little bit. But at the core, it's an 18th century war. Mm-hmm. And the way we usually think about it, we usually overlook that.
No, it's fascinating. Sean, your ideas focus more on the ideas behind behind these movements and documents, but are there any big misconceptions that you see?
No, I mean, I think we have the modern day progressive debunking of the signers, but that's about it. But no.
Okay, well, I might follow up on that thread in a minute then, but let's stick to the war for now. We have spent this entire time talking about this from the American perspective, but how did the British people or government view this conflict?
The British people eventually turned against it pretty decisively. There's some really interesting parallels between this war and, say, our Vietnam War, and one of them is that eventually the tax load gets high enough and the casualty counts get high enough that the British people start to protest, and one of the reasons the British withdrew from the war is this popular protest in the streets of London. One of obviously multiple reasons, but that's an important one.
So, what was motivating this opposition?
Their taxes were really high, much higher than colonial taxes. That's another one of these mythologies about the war, is that people think that colonial taxes were really high. They weren't high. They were a 10th or a 20th, depending on the colony, of what taxes were in England. And so, eventually the British people didn't want to pay for this war. They had family members over in America. They had felt a common kindred in a variety of ways, and they took to the streets.
Wow. Well, and the thing I'd say is there was support in Parliament for the American revolutionaries. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Edmund Burke, Charles Fox, and others from the very beginning were on our side.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Howe brothers, there's an interesting story there too. Richard and William, one's an admiral, He might have been admirable too. But he was an admiral and the other a general. They had a third brother who fought in the French and Indian War and had died in America during the French and Indian War. And some Americans raised the money to erect a statue to this Howe brother. I've forgotten where it is, but it's a statue erected in his honor. And so the Howe, and I think didn't one of them married an American? Didn't William marry Margaret?
The general did.
Yeah. Married an American. So there's some real sympathy with some very important British leadership, leading them to sympathize with the American cause. And there are a few occasions where Washington's army escaped because the Howes did not pursue him.
Interesting. Okay, well, back to the American perspective then. This era is just dense with icons of American history. It is, our attention is drawn to it because it's such a juncture in history. But also, there were a lot of genuinely impressive people running around at the time doing things. If we had to build a list of the Americans who are most responsible for the success of the American cause, who would we put on that list? And I want to hear from both of you on this. So, who wants to go first and throw some names in the pot here?
Go for it.
Okay, so let's be just throw out the easy one first. George Washington.
Yeah,
well, sure.
Commander of the military. Now, let's add a famous one and some not so famous ones. Ben Franklin gets a lot of credit for negotiating the treaty with the French to get their support, but he was ably helped by Silas Deane, who was the agent who was making sure all the supplies were getting to the colonies. And so he's someone I think that we don't ever hear that much about. So someone else I'd say who plays a large role, and I learned about this in an individual on my America 250 trip, is Robert Morris of Philadelphia, who was the financier of the American Revolution. So he was a trader, a shipper. He was the one running the guns and food and everything else into the colony, made a lot of money. And at times when they couldn't pay the soldiers, he put up the money for it or put up the collateral for it. And so to a certain extent, he's someone we don't hear much about. In return for this, he got land in return, but then when land values fell, his fortunes fell, and he ended up being put in debtor's prison. But here's something else I learned is the first bankruptcy law was written to get Morris out of debtor's jail because they were like, how can we let the person who really financed things stay here? And in fact, there were some people who established a pension for his wife so that they could live, because if it was attached to him, the people who he owed money could get to, but if it was for his wife, then they couldn't get it.
That's fascinating. Yeah. It would be embarrassing to throw Robert Morris in prison for debt. Yeah, absolutely. He had done so much. I would add, as a compatriot to Washington, I would add John Adams. He's an absolute workhorse in Congress. He's on all the major committees. He burns himself out day and night, getting the logistics together to support Washington's army, working on budgets, working with the ambassadors. He's in the trenches every day. Jefferson, by comparison, is working mostly in Virginia, and much less on the national scene. Adams is indispensable.
That makes sense. Thank you, guys. I think, is there a chance that we sometimes treat these figures as larger than life too much? Because of course the instinct is very impressive people. Let's remember them as larger than life like they were. But I'll start with you, Sean. Do you think that there's a chance that we sometimes idolize or deify these figures?
Oh yeah. No. I mean, seriously. I mean, if you go to the National Archives, it's shaped in a temple, and it has an original copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution there. It's in this darkened room. Their sign saying, "Be quiet." You're there, a sense of reverence. And so I think to a certain extent, on one level, we look at the amazing things that they did, but to a certain extent, it's only in the past, 100 years, and particularly in the past 20 years, to where we've probably gone in the exact opposite direction. I mean, Beard and others started saying, hey, they were out for their own economic self-interest. James Beard, Economic Interpretation of the
Charles Beard.
Yeah, Charles Beard.
James Beard has that great book on making bread.
Okay. Different person. Yeah.
Different guy.
I mean, with that, but Beard still respected the founders, the signers. Current progressives don't seem to really respect them in that way. But to a certain extent, I think we also have to look at some of them and just be in awe of them. I mean, take George Washington, for example. There's 3 things he did which were almost amazing. I mean, how many other people do it? First one was the Newburgh Conspiracy. This was toward the end, or maybe after the end, but before the treaty. The soldiers weren't being paid, and they were thinking about marching on the Continental Congress. And the idea was, would they impose a military dictatorship? Washington met with them, had that classic thing, what I've, in defense of the country, I've lost my eyesight, and he puts on this pair of glasses and reads and puts down a potential revolt. The second amazing thing was he was commander-in-chief of the military. Once the war was over, monarchy was his. And when I was in Annapolis this summer, I was standing across from the State House. I said, hey, it's a State House. Let's go see it. That's where Washington resigned his commission. It was a story to where he went in. The Continental Congress was there, all wearing their hats, showing authority. He came in. He took off his hat. He read his speech. When he got to the part about his soldiers, he almost broke into tears. So he did this. Resigned. He went. He handed his resignation. The president accepted it, and said a few words. Washington walked off, and they lifted their hats in respect to him. And King George III said, if Washington gives up all the power he has, that makes him the greatest man alive, because he cannot imagine anyone else doing that. And the third thing is, he went back to Mount Vernon after the war was over. He went back to Mount Vernon after 2 terms in the presidency, communicating the presidency should not be something that is a life appointment, because he could have been elected a 3rd time, most likely. And the fact, for those 3 things, that just says something amazing about the character of that person. And I think there are plenty of other things that we can see as commendable in Washington and the signers of the Declaration of Independence, because remember, they challenged the world hegemon. If they were caught, the way they treat traitors wasn't pleasant.
So it sounds like when I ask if if we are in danger of taking them too seriously, you almost think that we're making the opposite mistake more often.
I think today we focus more on the imperfections. Sure. I think at times we deify them. We have to remember that they are imperfect people who do great things. And to a certain extent, I think we have to remember that's all of us. And even from a Christian perspective, the Bible's a story of God using imperfect people to do amazing things. And it's a reminder, ordinary people can do extraordinary things.
So, David, you've probably got some good reflexes for this because you think a lot about historical figures. How do we thread that needle? How do we avoid either treating them as too much of a hero with reverence or only focusing on their flaws? I mean, how should we approach figures like that from our history?
Yeah, neither one of those takes them seriously, right? The apotheosis of Washington doesn't take Washington seriously either, right? One of those paintings that I love to show in class is the apotheosis of Lincoln, where Washington descends from heaven on a cloud of angels to carry Lincoln up into.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, wow. Yeah. I haven't seen that before.
It's not a great painting. It's just a really interesting image.
Yeah. Where is that painting?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay.
On canvas, I guess.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take Lincoln or Washington seriously either. And so I think that's one of the things that political science and history does really, really well, which is puncture the mythologies and take these people for what they are. And that includes their great accomplishments, which are really remarkable. I think that's a great summary of some of the great things that Washington did. They are remarkable. They're things that relatively few people can do. And yet they are human people. They are flawed people. And often the flaws and the greatness go together. It's kind of like the terribleness and the heroism of war going together. You don't get the heroism in daily life. You only get the heroism in the horrors of war. And I think that's true for these leaders too. Their greatness is exposed in the midst of the cauldron.
Yeah. Well, because we haven't talked much about Washington's flaws, but if you start piling those up, I mean, it's devastating as well. You know, he owned human beings, in slavery, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
How
do we balance this? How do we? Yeah.
I don't think we balance it. I think we say slavery's part of the culture, and he was helping to set up a government which eventually allowed slavery to be abolished. But he's very much a part of he's very much in the middle of the growth of the idea of liberty extending to all people. And we obviously still wrestle with the question of liberty in its various forms. But he's in the middle of that. And so he's working with liberty as he sees it, and other generations developed it.
Well, then maybe it is time to look at those broader implications, to look at the way these things have affected our culture and still affect it today. I mean, this was a really influential document at the time that it was signed. What does it mean to us today? What is the enduring significance of the Declaration?
Goodness. I'm not sure I have a whole lot of new things to say here. I think the enduring significance is that it sets forth a vision for government in which the people who are being governed are also being consulted. They're participating in the government, which is I think really quite special and relatively unusual. It's a government which argues for both equality and liberty, which I think is a really interesting pair to hold together and almost impossible to do, but there it is. We're trying. And to hold that standard up in global terms, I think that's what the Declaration implies. Is it's very evangelistic in that sense that these are universal values, these are universal rights, and they belong to all people. And so it's a very special document. It's a very special time, and it still resonates. I think still carries resonance today.
Yeah, to build upon that, I think the big thing we're looking at the Declaration is that it defines the aspirational values of our nation: liberty, equality, and self-government. Now, yes, to today, we can't see how liberty and equality were connected, but at that point is liberty is your freedom to do things responsibly. You have that because you're morally equal, because you're made in God's image, and the way we secure these rights is through self-government. So really, liberty, equality, self-government has developed into the foundation of what we now refer to as liberal democracy, the majority rule, but we try to protect the minority rights. The Constitution is an extension of this in ways. And so I think when we look at this in in history is look at every successful reform movement. Every single one appeals to the values of the Declaration of Independence.
Can you give us some examples?
So for example, Sam Huntington has made the argument that what reforms do is that they narrowed the gap between ideals and reality. And so you've got things like, at the beginning, it was a very elitist. The property owners had it. Jacksonian democracy leads to liberty and equality for all white males. You see the abolition movement, Abraham Lincoln, and Reconstruction are about extending liberty and equality to black men. The suffragists, and in fact, you look at Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. So, I'm going back to my trip. We did Antietam and then Gettysburg in back-to-back days. Antietam was the bloodiest day of battle, but that was a victory enough, in air quotes, to where he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which made the war about slavery in ways it was not beforehand. And then in the Gettysburg Address, 7 years ago, 1776, our forefathers brought forth in this kind of new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In most of that time, liberty was the main idea in politics. He makes equality as a co-North Star guiding principle for our nation, and democracy was always important because if you look at his first inaugural, his point is we're keeping the Union together. Just because you lost a vote doesn't mean you have a right to leave, and that's why government of the people, by the people, and for the people should not perish from the earth. So he's bringing in all these ideas in. The suffragist movement, women's rights movement, the civil rights movement. Go listen to MLK's speech on the Mall. He's making appeals to the Declaration of Independence. I'd even go farther. The LGBTQ community, in terms of same-sex marriage, freedom to marriage, marriage equality. They're hitting on two of those three aspirational values. And so if you don't appeal to at least two of those three, most likely or not, though your reform movement's not going to succeed, whether it's the populist, the socialist, or today, I think it's why the current progressives and the current populist will fail, because they're in many ways contrary to our American ideals.
So can we, just to push the question a little bit further, can we extend the legacy of the Declaration of Independence internationally? Where do we see this? Yeah, that was directed to you.
The movement of liberal democracy throughout the world. We've had multiple waves of democratization, and you don't get those without the American first example, and then sometimes very active promotion through diplomacy or violence of those values as well. So I think the worldwide implication of this continues that same pattern that Sean was pointing out. The appealing to those values, other people then take them sometimes in directions we don't expect, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. But that does begin that process. It's, you can probably see the two engines of the American Revolution and the French Revolution as driving, sometimes in overlap, sometimes in opposition, so many different movements around the world. I definitely think the international implication should also be considered there for sure. The way that we think about this and the way that we talk about it to ourselves is really interesting, because the Declaration of Independence is not the Constitution. It's not law. It's not something that you can, be arrested for not following, right? But it does continue to guide us in our values in these ways. Has this changed with time? Have different generations of Americans thought differently about the Declaration? Have they appealed to it in different ways? Or has it more or less been a stable influence on us?
You want to take that one?
Well, I think it gets back to my previous point is that people have appealed to it over time to vindicate their rights. I mean, I think back to Frederick Douglass's "What does the 4th of July mean to me?" I mean, and his point is, yeah, it's not all men are created equal. For people like me, it's not. And so what you will see is that people are constantly making those arguments. Even in the Civil War, the Confederates were saying that they were the heirs of the Declaration of Independence and others. And so I think you see these ideas are common. They provide stability, but they also provide the opportunity for reform and moving forward when we don't meet those ideals. When people point them out, it's a way to rally support among others to make sure that we do move closer to those ideals.
Yeah, and I think I land there too. I think I land more with a stable interpretation of this is our guiding set of values, and so I see less. I haven't thought about the answer to this question very much, but I think my answer would be that there's not very much volatility in how people view the Declaration of Independence, and I would bring up a contrast just by way of illustration if we have time for a contrast.
Yeah.
There's a very interesting book by David Hackett Fischer called Paul Revere's Ride, where he outlines in very detailed fashion Paul Revere's ride to warn the colonists of Massachusetts that the British troops were coming. This is to start the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And one of the things that Fisher does in his appendix is spend time assessing how different generations have viewed this particular battle, and then Paul Revere himself. And he goes through 8 different cycles, 8 different generations, and they're all very, very different. So the first generation, for instance, wanted to show Paul Revere as a reactive person who was not an instigator by any means. It was the British who were instigating the problem. It's the British who were invading. Paul Revere was just responding to protect American rights. And the second generation, though, one generation later, it flips that script. And Paul Revere is this heroic figure who is riding out in opposition to the British. And he's active and he's aggressive and he's heroic and he's brandishing his sword and he's thwarting the British. And it's a very different picture. And he goes all the way through up to, I forget when he stops. I don't see that kind of dynamism for the Declaration of Independence. I think the Declaration is much more stable. We believe in these values: equality, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think there's some stability there.
Wow.
It's not like, Woodrow Wilson and his reputation after World War I.
Yeah.
That's my judgment. I haven't read anything about that question though.
Is that your sense as well, Sean? That it's a stable force on our politics?
Yeah, I think it's both stable and a way to move forward at the same time. But still, the idea of we're moving forward in ways that are consistent with our founding ideals.
Mm-hmm. So the way we think about those founding ideals is something that's probably changed a little bit over time. But one of the things I think we see today is competing attempts to recontextualize. If you're on the more progressive left side of things, you might start to see it through the lens of continued oppression, and the promises of the Declaration seem hypocritical. But we also see on the other side of the political spectrum, on the populist right, we've started to see people who make the claim that it's the first step in the corrupting influence of Enlightenment liberalism that creeping into American politics, and maybe all of our problems were seated there, things like that. How would each of you respond to these critiques, these two different views of the Declaration, these revisionist views?
Well, again, it sounds like the Declaration is being used to justify, right? As opposed to, in this case, we think of the Declaration as being guidance.
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna pursue life, liberty, and equality. To me, this use, as you're outlining it, sounds much more like we're going to use whatever authority we have to justify our behavior, which is a really different thing. And obviously people do it all the time, but it seems like a fundamentally different use of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. So, I mean, for both sides on some level, they're trying to reject the Declaration, the system of government, because they see it as an obstacle to achieving their aims. And so their big problem is they both look at all the warts without ever looking at any of the benefits of this. So yeah, I mean, did some of the founders own slaves? Yes, but they also set up a system to where we could eventually do something about it. Did it come from these liberal ideas? Yes, but is the atomization of today what Patrick Deneen would argue from the populist right? Does it contribute in part to it? Yes. Is it the only reason? No. And once again, he's looking at all the bad things without looking at the potential good things.
Before we get on to kind of some concluding elements, because I want to start to draw this down. Sean, you've been making all these comments as you went through, as we talked about these different things. You keep referencing summer travel.
Yeah.
You keep talking about, I went here, I went there. So what did you do?
So my family took the Griswold family vacations when I was growing up. My dad said one of his biggest regrets was that we did not go up the eastern seaboard in 1776 for the bicentennial. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to make that same mistake in the semi-quincentennial.
But you were 6 then, so it would have been a waste of,
Yeah, probably
You
so.
probably weren't ready for it.
I probably wasn't ready for it. And so I dragged my wife along for about a 13-day trip. We had Antietam, Gettysburg, Valley Forge, Philadelphia, Independence Hall, crossing of the Delaware, went down to Fort McHenry in Baltimore. Okay. So he's David's making oaring things. We didn't oar ourselves across, but we went to where that was learned about that. Went to Annapolis. And from there went to Mount Vernon, Old Town, Alexandria, and ended before coming home at James Madison's Mount Pelier or something like that. I think it took us 13 days.
Okay.
Great trip.
So it was a great trip.
One day for each colony.
I didn't think about that. I'll make sure I'll tell my wife that. But the thing is with this is the biggest thing I guess I come away from this is gratitude for those who have come before me, because it's sometimes sterile in books. Those sometimes great, but when you go there, you see things, you learn things about them. It makes it real in ways that it may not in other things. And so we in this country are where we're at because of what people who have gone on before us have done. And while we're no means a perfect nation, we are a nation that makes mistakes but works to overcome them and tends to move forward, if I may leap into the next big document, to become closer to, which will never achieve a more perfect union. And so when I think about celebrating 250 years of America, yeah, I recognize the good, I recognize the bad, but I look at the overall arc of our nation politically and historically, and I think there are a lot of things to celebrate. I know we're in a very difficult time now. I think we politicize too much, but I would even go further where we're talking I've talking most about political, historical things, but there are amazing things we've done in economics and culture and other things. America is not just about politics. And I think that's one of the great things the World Cup has done is you got all these people from Europe coming over and saying, I love this nation. Well, from Europe, Latin America, Japan, and they're talking about all the things they love about America. And it's a reminder that there are things that we take for granted that really make us special in the eyes of a lot of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
So what would you say America 250 means to you, David?
Oh, I can't do better than what Sean was talking about.
It's hard to top that.
Yeah. I can go back to the story of 1776. No, 1976, because he was taking that trip and
Well, he wanted to.
He wanted to, but didn't. Yeah. But that bicentennial was for me really special. I remember in particular the sailing ships which were sent here from all over the world. I've forgotten how many, a couple of hundred sailing ships came and sailed into New York Harbor from, I don't know, 25, 30 different countries. I've forgotten how many. And it was a reminder, again, of how special the world sees the United States, or can see the United States, as this hallmark of liberty and also prosperity. We don't want to just totally sub out pursuit of happiness in favor of property, because it's a very prosperous nation. And so we haven't quite passed through the 250-year mark, but the 200-year mark I remember being quite special, and hopefully this fourth will be as well.
Wow.
Well, and I hope this is a question that a lot of people who are listening to this and those who are in America is, what about America is special to you? What does America 250 move to you and mean to you? And I think that's some reflection that I think we would all benefit from.
Absolutely. Well, I can't think of a better note to end this on then. Thank you guys so much for your time. This has been a really nice conversation. We'll try and get this up as soon as possible, but this has been a pleasure. And thank you especially, David, for joining us today for the second time. Well, maybe we'll get a third.
It's an honor. It's an honor. I'll take it. Thank you.
All right. Well, I will now yield the remainder of my time then.